So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. So it's really a great pleasure because Courtney Spikes is a dear family friend, and she had agreed to make the shift from the live presentation this morning to the virtual presentation. And Courtney earned her degrees from the University of Pennsylvania and from UCLA. She lectures at Loyola Marymount University and serves as a historical consultant for television and feature films. So Courtney, great thanks to you. Her presentation is entitled Mapping Paris After Haussmann, and we are all looking forward to this spectacular presentation.
Oh, thank you so much for that kind introduction, Ron. Can everybody hear me okay? Thumbs up? Great. I'd like to thank you and California Map Society's President, John Jablonski, for organizing this event and inviting me to speak here today at the Northern California Spring Conference. I feel like I've had the best of both worlds this past year because I had the pleasure of attending the in-person Southern California Conference in Los Angeles this past fall and meeting many of you, including my fellow speakers today, Juliet Rothman and Fred Desjarlais. Am I saying that correctly? Desjarlais? And then I got to experience my first virtual meeting with you all at the Bay Area Mappers meeting online last month. And at that virtual gathering, we all got to see the incredible work being done by Tom Paper and his creation, The Digital Gallery. And like you, I was impressed with the highly detailed image quality of the Captain Cook maps provided by Rich Bryman, excuse me. And I liked Tom's mission to create a space to help people learn and engage through the power of maps. So I emailed Tom afterwards, which I think a lot of us did, and he generously agreed to work with me on today's presentation. So we put together a new exhibit called Paris Transformed on the Digital Gallery, and I'm going to be using that today as sort of a test run as we explore the maps of France's capital and its evolution into the modern city we know today. So I am delighted to be speaking with you this morning as your first Zoom California Map Society conference speaker. I hope you will be kind as we take this leap together, and I try to use both PowerPoint and the Digital Gallery in a screen share setup. So here we go. I'm going to screen share now the PowerPoint presentation, or let's see, I think I do the desktop. That's what he was saying to do. Okay, so that's where we're going to go, but we're going to start here, and I'm going to go to, all right, can you all see that?
Yes.
Is that good? Okay,
yes.
So I'm going to try using, I'm going to use the clicker here. I'm going to use this. Okay, ready. Here we go. So, whoa, went the wrong way. That's not the right way. Okay, sorry guys. I'm going to escape. I'm not quite sure. Oh, because that's where this cursor was. Got it. Okay, let's try this again. So, Paris, the city of Paris, city of light, city of revolution, city of occupation, and city of love. And whether or not you've been to visit France's capital city, the jewel in its crown, I challenge all of us to remember a time when we did not know Paris, a time when Paris was not already a part of our imagination. Because as Audrey Hepburn says, Paris is always a good idea. But before you even step into Paris, before you even step up the walk to the Champs-Élysées, or your first time sitting at a cafe, perhaps sipping a glass of red wine and watching the world walk by, or maybe catching your breath the first time you stand in front of the Louvre with the IMP sculpture in front of it, or the beautiful cream-colored limestone facade of Notre Dame, it would really be hard to imagine a time of someone in our generation that had not already envisioned Paris, at least in our mind's eye, at some point in our youth. Because maybe you found Paris in the words of Victor Hugo in Les Miserables, or Honoré de Balzac in The Human Comedy, or even Alexandre Dumas and The Three Musketeers. I had to put that in because Ron's son also wrote a book about the Three Musketeers. Or maybe you've imagined it in the colors of Degas and his ballet dancers, or Monet and his pictures before the water lilies of public spaces and parks that we all enjoy, or even Toulouse-Lautrec at the Moulin Rouge. Now, I know I've imagined it in the crunch of a baguette or the buttery crumble of a croissant, But some of you may have found Paris in the eyes of fashion through Dior, Yves Saint Laurent, or Coco Chanel. Or perhaps like me, you found Paris first in film. I know I'll never forget watching Gene Kelly dance his way through An American in Paris with Leslie Caron and Sid Charisse. Or perhaps seeing Audrey Hepburn fall in love with Fred Astaire in Funny Face. And what I'm trying to say here, what I'm trying to get us to envision, is that long before our own footsteps trod the meandering cobbled streets of the Latin Quarter, or perhaps rushed down the stairs to catch that last metro because, well, before Uber, sometimes there were no cars left at the taxi stand. We've all experienced Paris in some way, virtual or otherwise. And that's part of the city's appeal, isn't it? Our imagining of the city, even before we arrive there ourselves to hear, smell, taste, and see all of its delights in the flesh. We are, in fact, akin to the virtual 19th century flaneur, an observer, walking through the city, seeing daily life unfold, and experiencing the sensation of being in Paris, even when we are not there. Because even when we are not there, we can identify Paris with a single image of the Eiffel Tower, or the sound of a scooter, the clinking of coffee cups at a cafe table, or maybe even the squeeze of an accordion as the first notes of Ma Vie en Rose sing through the air. Because Paris that we know, is actually one that was precisely planned and specifically shaped by a collaboration between two men who consciously imposed their vision of a modern city onto the framework of an ancient one. Because during the second half of the 19th century, Emperor Napoleon III and George Eugene Haussmann intentionally designed Paris to be, in fact, the most modern capital city in the whole world. Now, as many of you have read, they cannot take all the credit of this because designs and even some early infrastructure had indeed been made before they started. However, it would be under the direction of Haussmann, backed by the authority of the emperor, that would allow those plans, ideas, and dreams of a modern city of light to come to fruition during their time in power. And we, all of us here, know how to read this story through something we all love, maps. So let's take a step back in time and look at a couple of facts about the era. And then I want to dive right into the Paris Transformed exhibit on the Digital Gallery with Tom Paper. Previously, I was going to go over some data and statistics while on the slides here, but I think it'll be more fun if we do that as we're sort of walking through the maps of Paris and seeing how the city evolved. So bear with me as we go through it. But what I want to show you right here, this map is a modern map of Paris. And I forgive me if most of you know this already, but it's numbered into 20 neighborhoods called arrondissements. And it starts with number 1. And if you see in the center of the page there, number 1 is actually named the first arrondissement in honor of Napoleon III, because that's where his house was, the Palace of the Tuileries. And it goes out in a spiral, like a snail, outward in an organized fashion so that you can always figure out where you are. Some of you might know too that the zip code for Paris is 750, and then it's 01, 02, 03, 04. So if you get an address that says 75006, you know that that address is in the 6th arrondissement. Or 7020, you know that it's going to be in the 20th over here. Haussmann did this. He also organized how the streets and houses were numbered. So if you start at the Seine and you move your way outward, either north or south, the number starts at 1 and then goes increasingly higher. So you can find your way around the city. He also had everyone drive on the right side of the road, and he introduced safe public transportation systems. This is a map that shows where Haussmann, during the Second Empire, under Napoleon III, established a lot of the boulevards that were created under his purview. The ones that are in red are during the Second Republic under Haussmann and Napoleon III. The ones that are in blue are done during the Third Republic, after Napoleon III was defeated in the Franco-Prussian War and ousted, and after Haussmann was ousted as well from his position because many people claimed there was a lot of corruption involved. But what this shows us is that actually in the new government, the Third Republic, their legacy endured. And in fact, many boulevards and many building projects continued even under the new government. So even though there's some complaining about Haussmann and Napoleon III, what they were trying to do was actually continued by their political opposition after they were ousted from office. So this is just a quick slide. I wanted to give you a sense of where we were. This is 1852, is the beginning of the Second Empire. France has gone through a lot. They were monarchy for over 1,000 years, and then, well, they've had French Revolution, different republics, different empires. They're on their 5th republic now. We are actually going to be talking about the time period during the Second Empire. Now, you might be wondering why there's a Napoleon I and a Napoleon III. Napoleon I is the one that most people know. He's the one who was a general during the French Revolution. He became president of the First Republic, First Council, and then proclaimed himself emperor. There's a very famous painting by Jacques-Louis David where he takes the crown and he is crowning Josephine, when in fact he actually was taking the crown and crowning himself at the Cathedral of Notre Dame. But they thought that would be politically unsavory, so they made him crowning Josephine. He was deposed and his son eventually died. So when we come to the Second Empire, this Napoleon is actually the nephew of the first Napoleon. He's Napoleon III because he's honoring the legacy of his uncle and his cousin. Okay, here's Napoleon I, next to Napoleon III. Napoleon III took a lot of the iconography of Napoleon I and utilized his name recognition actually to promote his candidacy and support throughout the country. Okay. Tom, are there any questions now, or should we just dive right in?
We should dive in. I don't think we have any questions.
Excellent. I'm just seeing chats popping up, so I want to make sure.
Oh, no, that's all right.
Okay, so I want to escape out of here. Again, excuse me with the technology as I'm getting used to it.
There's some people talking in the back of the class. So.
Oh, good. Well, if there's a problem or questions or whatever, please let me know. Okay, so here we go. So we're at the digital gallery now, and what we have here are 12 maps and 12 images that we've put together as part of the exhibit. And for those of you that haven't had a chance to visit the digital gallery created by Tom Paper, who's hosting this meeting today, you can scroll over and see the title of the images. In this case, we did it by date. And you can also see some of these images. I want to thank the Fishers. The Fishers very generously offered us 2 images from
Hold on, somebody's not muted. Okay, go ahead. Oh, you need to unmute yourself, Courtney.
Is that good?
Yeah.
I wanted to thank the Fishers because they very generously offered some of their personal photographs from the 1920s of 2 scenes in Paris of areas that were not a part of the Haussmannization project. So we have these images here. What I want to do is I want to go into 5 maps. 2 we're going to go to in depth. The rest are just sort of overviews. The first 2 are going to give us the size and scope of Paris. And then we're going to go into one that's going to give us the pre-Haussmann. And then we're going to go into the one that's giving the post-Haussmann. So first one, we're going to look at 1620. And I need to move this so I can go to the expanded screen. Is this right, Tom?
Yep.
All right, so here we are. So here we are at 1620. And where we're standing on this map was an etching from 1620, but it was published in the 1650s in Dutch as a series of geographical prints. And we're standing to the west of the city. Our back is to the Atlantic Ocean. We are looking east. If we could continue our vista, we would see Austria and Russia. And ironically, the image that's on the left-hand side of our paper is actually the right bank, and the image on the right-hand side of the paper is the left bank. But the north is to the left and the south is to the right. What I want to draw your attention to is the wall around Paris here was the one that was built in the 14th century under the French King Charles V. It would be expanded under Louis XIII and XIV to encompass the Louvre and the Palais, the Jardin des Tuileries. And we're going to look at a couple things. We're going to look at the Louvre, the Pont Neuf, and Notre Dame here, because I want you to see that and see how it changes over time. So I'm going to try to dive in a little bit on this, get us a little closer. I want to diminish that. There we go. So now I can see. All right. So if you take a look, the detail on this is incredible. If you look to the right over here, you can see a beautiful carriage. You can see horses dancing over here on the left. But this is the Louvre Palace. And what I want you to notice is that the gallery on the north side is not there yet. This part in the back is the original part of the Louvre. Here's the gallery along the Seine. And this part is known as the Palais des Tuileries, the Tuileries Palace, and overlooking the garden next to it. This is the traditional seat of power for the kings of France. This would change with Louis XIV. We know him as the builder of Versailles Palace outside of Paris, and also known as the Sun King. But this is a 1620 map. His father, Louis XIII, is living there now. And as you can see, the original wall built by Charles V is bifurcating the palace, which is why he extended it. If we move a little farther in, we can see the Pont Neuf. Pont Neuf means the new bridge. It was built by Henry IV, the first Bourbon king. There's a little statue to him. It's actually called the Vert Galant because he was quite popular with the ladies. And this bridge is important because it doesn't have any houses or shops built on it. It was built specifically for traffic, and it's the first bridge in Paris to have sidewalks, which made it possible for both men and women to traverse the Seine using this bridge. And here's the island. This is Ile de la Cité. Ile de la Cité is right here. And notice Notre Dame, which was started being built in the 12th century, finished in the 14th. Notre Dame's here. And there's lots of houses and buildings all around it. However, so it doesn't really look like it does today. And in fact, over here, number 34 is the Hotel Dieu. This is the public hospital. And there's Notre Dame itself. Tom, I know you're on the chat. Is anyone wanting to look at anything specific here? Or should I move ahead?
No, I think we don't have any questions. So I
Okay,
think you're
great.
good.
The last thing I want to point out is over here in the back top, if you can see my cursor circling it, that's the Bastille prison. That will be there for a couple hundred years and be torn down as part of the French Revolution in 1789. We're going to look very briefly at 1805 because I want to show you how the structure of Paris has changed. We're just going to look at wide view. So we're looking at aerial view of Paris, and this is the circle that I showed you before on the 1620 map. We now have a new Farmers General wall that was put in place in the 1780s to better collect tolls and taxes for goods coming into the city. I want you to take note over here. This is the Bois de Boulogne, and on the right, the Bois de Vincennes. By the time we finish with Haussmann renovation, all of this will be included in Paris as a whole. By the way, when you're on the site, if you're interested in learning more about a particular map, you can just click over here where the page torn down over here is, and you can get the title, a link, and some information about it. And you can also right-click to continue through to see the maps with the information showing. All right, so
Hey,
this is,
Courtney,
yeah.
we have a question. Someone was asking, I think on the map of 1620, how did they do that to make it sort of look like it was a photo, like, you're sort of looking down?
You mean this way?
Yeah.
That's where the person was actually standing and drew it. I mean, the beauty of the etching is just incredible. I mean, the
And there's a hill that of that sort of elevation.
What do you?
It's got the bird's eye view, like they were up in a balloon or something. It seems.
No. There's no balloon. There's no balloon until the 1800s. There's no balloon until till the 1800s. It's really used. This is they call it as the eagle flies. That's the term they use. And again, these are not just perfect scale. So we should not consider this to be, but there are hills around Paris. It's not completely flat. And this is idealized with little people standing here looking at the hill. It's done for artistic. There's a compass rose down on the right. But these aren't the first maps of Paris either. We just picked the 1620 because it's talking about the Louvre, Notre Dame, and Bastille, which we're going to continue talking about for the rest of the time.
Just one more thing I want to just jump in. Somebody asked about the numbers. The numbers represent the different buildings. And I found just last night a page, and I'll see if I can post it, with all the, 260 or so. There's a legend, basically. So the numbers represent the names of all the buildings.
Yes, and so a lot of these maps that we see in the earlier time periods are actually parts of books, and they're collections of maps, and they're historical maps, usually showing things over time. And so in the book, they usually have a complete legend, which is, sort of something we're used to today, where we have legends like the Bahamas Guide in California, where you can find pages on a map, or tourist maps like the Discovery Now maps, where you can pinpoint a certain place of interest. So it's not new to us. Okay, so any other questions on that one, Tom?
Nope.
I know it's such lovely. We could spend all the whole time on that one. Okay, so so you've seen the size of Paris expand. You've seen the original wall, the small wall, the Farmers General Wall, and now we're going to look at some detail in the 1811 map. So this map is reflective of Napoleon I during the First Empire during his reign. And so if we zoom in, we're going to look at Ile de la Cité here, the island, but we're going to start with the Louvre. So we've looked at the Louvre before. This is the Louvre Palace, the museum now. And again, we still do not have this second gallery on the north side. We don't have Rue de Rivoli going all the way down. We have a little bit of Rue de Rivoli that was started to be built in, I think, 1802 by Napoleon. We have the Jardin des Tuileries. And if we continue along, we can go up to the Arc de Triomphe, which again was to celebrate Napoleon I's military victories. And we can see it just has two north-south, east-west axis at this time. That's going to change a lot. And if you sort of take a look at the map, it still sort of looks like medieval Paris. It's got lots of little streets, curved streets, small, narrow streets. And if we go just north of the Louvre, into this little circle area, this is the Hall de Blé. This is the marketplace for wheat, because what was the #1 food source for the French people was bread. So the wheat market was very important. Around this wheat market would be lots of other marchés that would be selling all sorts of produce and goods at this time, but it wasn't very organized. And it had not a lot of oversight for sanitation, etc. If you go just to the left, you can see the Douane de la Ferme. This is where the custom taxes would be collected for people bringing products and goods into the city as well. I'm going to zoom back out. So again, we're on the right bank on the north side. We've just looked at the Louvre, we've looked at the Hall de Blé, and we're going to go back down to Ile de la Cité. And again, notice Ile de la Cité has the two north-south axes of the main roads that are still existing today. Haussmann's going to expand them. These are actually the original Roman roads as well. Notre Dame is here down in the corner, and you still see lots of little buildings all around it. If we come down just a little bit, they have a separate market, a separate marché for the Halle au Vin. The wine market is over here, and this is actually the dock for wine merchants as well. So we think of Paris today with these broad, tall sides to the river, but in fact, those are new. It was a sandy, gentle flow into the river so people could dock their boats, unload their goods, and bring them into the city. You'll notice that over here to the right, the Bastille prison is no longer there. It's above the Canal Saint-Martin. Many of you might know the Place de Vosges, which is that beautiful 17th century place where it's a perfect square and has the brick buildings with the white cornerstones. But this is where the Bastille stood because in 1789, as part of the protests in the French Revolution, the citizens of Paris stormed the Bastille, and they actually spent several days tearing it down brick by hand until it was just a pile of rubble. That is actually July 14th is the date they celebrate. Like we celebrate July 4th as their Day of Independence, they celebrate July 14th as their Independence Day. So let us, Tom, was there something else in this map, or can I go ahead to the next one?
No.
Okay. So now we're going to jump ahead to 1865 and see how the changes Haussmann made figured onto the map. This is a tourist map. So you'll notice that there's 4 quadrants, each with a different color. Those colors refer to sections of the guidebook. And in each block of color is a page number, again, referring to reference in the guidebook. And if we look, the city is much larger. We now have this much larger band of walls around it. And it includes those 2 woods that I showed you earlier, the Bois de Boulogne and the Bois de Vincennes. This now is the annexation of Paris that took place in 1860. In the middle of Napoleon III's reign, which went from 1852 to 1870, he annexed all of the suburbs of Paris, increasing the population by about 500,000 to make it a larger city and to encompass the 2 parks on the outer edges, which were donated by him to the city. So if we dive into this one again, the detail is just phenomenal. We're going to look at the Louvre. Our heads are tilting slightly because it's framed slightly differently. And we can see that they have completed construction on the Louvre. And we have this other gallery here. So it's completely enclosed. What you will notice is that we have the Palais de Tuileries is still there. This is where Napoleon III's living with his family and ruling from. This, unfortunately, will be burnt down by the Communards in 1870-71 when they revolt after the loss to the Franco-Prussian War. So we'll lose that. But it now looks like, once that's gone, that's the modern version of the Louvre. You have the two arms facing out to the Jardin des Tuileries. You would walk in through here, and you have Ian Pei's giant glass pyramid right here in the center. If we jump up to that marketplace that had the wheat, the Hall de Blé, right over here, that circular area, we now see a set of very neat and tidy Halles Centrales. It's called Les Halles. In French, you typically would link les with the H, les halles, but it's an idiomatic way of saying it, so it's called Les Halles. And this is the central hall for all agricultural produce coming into the city and being sold. And these were ginormous, beautiful structures that really are reminiscent of the 1851 exposition of the Crystal Palace in London, where it's beautiful steel and glass. The price of glass had come down. The use of steel manufacturing had been much easier. And so this is representing the most modern technology, the most modern materials and architecture of that time period. Pull out just a little bit. I'm going to show you that Rue de Rivoli, that was just a little street here, has now, Haussmann would have torn down 800 buildings. 800 buildings along Rue de Rivoli, and spent about 1.2 million francs to create this new broad avenue that my cursor's going over. That's going to take us all the way to Place de la Bastille, actually even beyond that. But you're going to have a clear view from Place de la Bastille, with the former place of the Bastille prison. It now has a monument in honor of the Revolution of 1830. And we're going to walk all the way down and see all the way to the Louvre, past City Hall. City Hall's right here. Past the Louvre, past the Jardin des Tuileries. We're going to go to Place de la Concorde. Now, Place de la Concorde used to be Place Royale. Then it was Place de la Révolution. This is where the guillotine took care of Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette, Robespierre, etc. They renamed it Place de la Concorde because now everyone is in accord, everyone is in agreement. It's now a place of celebration. This is actually where every July 14th, the president and prime minister of France sit facing up the Champs-Élysées. Their backs are to the Louvre and the past. They're looking up the Champs-Élysées to the forward motion of the future. And this is where the parade of all the military comes down to celebrate their Independence Day, and the beautiful planes come across with the three colors of the flag, which are the same as ours. It's also where, if you're a fan of the Tour de France, which I am, where the Tour de France ends every year on these beautiful 7 turns through the Champs-Élysées and around the
Courtney?
updated Arc de Triomphe.
Hey, Courtney.
Yeah.
We got a couple questions.
Yeah.
The colored squares, what do the colors mean?
The colors refer to sections of the guidebook. So the map as a whole is a part of a guidebook actually in anticipation of the Paris Exposition of 1867. So actually each square represents a section of the guidebook. So they divided into 4 colors, and then each color has their own numbers. And so you would read about that in the guidebook that's attached to the map. And actually, if you look down here, the Champ de Mars, the Field of Mars, which is where the Eiffel Tower is today. It has not been built yet. It would not be built for another 20 years, but in 1865, they actually have the information about the exposition right here, ready to go for when you come to visit the city 2 years from the creation of this map. So if we continue up the Champs-Élysées, we can see the Arc de Triomphe. The Arc de Triomphe, what we saw earlier, only had the north, south, and east-west access. It now has 12 streets emanating from it, and has a clear view across the city. So if you stood on the top of the Arc de Triomphe, you would be able to see most of the city, and you could command your troops or police if there was any sort of uprising that needed to be addressed. And it also makes traveling through and around the city that much easier. And it's called Place de l'Étoile, étoile meaning star, because now it looks like a star. Tom, another question?
Yeah, someone asked, would not these maps be created by surveyors and then the buildings would be drawn? I think they're getting at like how these plans were made.
There's a whole, okay, that's getting into more technical aspects of how the maps were actually made. which I am not an expert on how maps are made. I'm a historian of France. So I will do my best to answer some of those questions. I would guess that somebody in the audience probably knows more about that than I would. I will say this, cartography and etching is, and lithography is a strong field in France. In the 1820s and 30s, lithography exploded in France. They became experts at it. I could do a whole talk on just lithography and its evolution in the 1830s and the evolution of using the plates and the chemicals involved. So there were cartographers and etchers that worked together, and then they would be hired by publishers who would actually publish the map. So they would pay them off and try to make a profit in selling the map. And this one, again, was made in anticipation of the Exposition of 1867. So where those cartographers got their information from, I couldn't say. I'd have to do a deeper dive into some of that.
I did notice in one of the books I was looking at, Paris Reborn, about the triangulation that Haussmann did, that he built towers throughout the city to use the method of triangulation to map things out and understand hills and valleys and whatnot, which hadn't been done previously.
I love that. Absolutely. I mean, Haussmann was, what I think people don't understand is because it's not celebrated very much in France, which I find very odd, but neither is Lafayette for that matter. He brought an administrative quality to the reimagining of Paris and the implementation of this infrastructure that was very clinical. And I think that they often talk about him being from Alsace, and Alsace is, German French. And so they sort of think of him as this German imposition onto the old Paris, the beautiful lines of Paris. So a lot of the scientific applications that he did in creating maps and the city itself are things that aren't as celebrated as much. Okay. So here we go. We've talked about the Louvre and how it's evolved. We talked about Les Halles. I've started to show you the Champs-Élysées, and now you can take the Champs-Élysées all the way up past the Arc de Triomphe, and now you can take your carriage and you can take a left-hand turn. You could be in the Bois de Boulogne, this beautiful new public park that was inspired actually by Hyde Park in London, and actually helped inspire some of the work done in Central Park in New York. You can see that there's the Allée de Longchamp, which would take you to the Longchamp horse track races. But people would take their carriages and come up and ride along. And if anyone's seen the movie Gigi, Maurice Chevalier thanks heaven for little girls while walking along the pathways of the Bois de Boulogne in that beautiful movie. Let's go back and take a look at now the Ile de la Cité. And here we can see completely transformed. Ile de la Cité was completely razed and rebuilt mostly to house the Palais de Justice, the administrative offices, as well as the police headquarters. And we now see with Notre Dame this beautiful open courtyard that is what we experience today. The Place de Parvis, Parvis just refers to an open courtyard in front of a church or cathedral. This was actually renamed in 2006 to be Place de Jean-Paul II in honor of the Pope. And right here you can see the Hotel Dieu is still here on the south side. That will be moved in 2 years after this map is made to over here to this right side, and it take over this whole space to be a huge public hospital. In its place, what you'll see today is a statue of Charlemagne in honor of him there. And if we shoot over a little bit down back to our Hall of Wine, we can see that it's greatly expanded. The Porte au Vin, the Hall au Vin, is greatly expanded now, and you could go to different buildings to get your type of wine. You could go to the Bordeaux Hall, you could go to the Champagne Hall, you could go to the wines of Languedoc or Pinot Noir, etc. So that's there as well. Hold on, let me just think. When Haussmann started, he was hired in 1853. And he started with the Rue de Rivoli. Rue de Rivoli was the first main project that Napoleon III wanted to have made because he wanted to host an exposition in 1855. So at the kickoff, Haussmann was doing a massive project. He had 1,500 architects and 60,000 workers working, making basically Paris into the largest construction site in the world. And if we think about Paris before this, Paris was really just a series of dark, narrow streets that often smelled of, unsanitary conditions, and the poorest populations were often living 10 to a room. There were only 2 public parks in the entire city. Now, after Haussmann, there are 4 major parks, but 27 total, including squares and little parks throughout the different arrondissements. In 1832, there was a cholera epidemic that killed over 20,000 Parisians. So in the city of Paris, 20,000 people died over the course of 6 months from the cholera epidemic. It returns again in 1849, and the conditions were still so bad in the city before Haussmannization began that in just 1 week, 3,500 people died, in part because a large group of society folk went to their huge masquerade ball despite being warned that the disease was spreading. Just a little thought for today. So if we keep in mind, the population of Paris had doubled since 1800. In 1800, it was about 500,000. By 1850, it was over 1 million inhabitants. And during the time of Napoleon III's rule, which is about 20 years, it increased by almost another million. Today's population of Paris, in the size that you see here on this map, is about 2.2 million. During the time of Napoleon III, around the 1870, it was 1.85 million. So it hasn't actually grown that much. And Tom was kind enough to share with me that the size of Paris is about 40 square miles. And if you compare that with San Francisco is 49 square miles, and Manhattan is about 20. So if you double the size of Manhattan, or a little bit smaller than San Francisco, that's the size of Paris, created in 1860 at its largest point.
That's the 20 arrondissements.
Correct. So what we're looking at now is the 20 arrondissements. This is the modern map. This is the size of today. So some of the things, Tom, if you want to tool around the map, I'll give out some information.
Well, I was wondering if you were going to talk about the opera and the the road on this map that doesn't exist yet.
Yes. Okay.
That was amazing.
The Opera House is one of the new things that is built because Napoleon III loves the opera. And so up here, we can see this is the new opera house, and it's called the Palais Garnier. Garnier was the architect, and they nicknamed it that because it was so opulent. It seemed like a palace, and so they were kind of making fun of the architect. And you can see here, there's 2 lines on this map that are showing you where the planned route of the Avenue de l'Opéra will be built, actually, a couple years later, during the Third Republic, after Napoleon III and Haussmann are both ousted from power, they will actually continue to build this. And in the digital gallery exhibit, you can actually see images of the destruction of the buildings and the road around it to create this long
Courtney,
pathway. Yeah.
Can we go there?
Yep.
I think that would be interesting to go to that those pictures right now, just to give people a sense of the demolishment.
So this is Rue de Rivoli. This is the road that was near the Louvre. This was one of the little roads near it. This is the one that was demolished. It's actually Rue de Jardinay. This is the new Rue de Rivoli that we see, where there's carriages. They're driving on the right side of the road. The beautiful arcades to the left, where you could walk covered, protected from the elements, and have shops. And by the way, notice the gas lights here. Haussmann put in 15,000 gas lights, which allowed the city to be lit. And so shops could stay open and people could walk safely around the city at nighttime.
Is that why it's called the City of Light?
It's actually called the City of Light because of the 18th century Enlightenment era. That's what it refers to. Enlightenment, lightening the mind. This is a photograph of the Bois de Boulogne. That's that big park, sort of like Central Park to the left of the city, to the west of the city. And this is one of the sewers. I didn't talk about the sewers today, but they added 360 miles of sewers and fresh water during the time of Haussmannization. And some of the photographers, some young photographers, this is actually by Nadar, pictured the sewers because it was the height of modernity. It was a sign that they weren't going to have another cholera outbreak. It was a sign that they were a modern city. And so they actually celebrated this. And in fact, you can take tours of the sewer today. I've done it. But they actually had special boats built for people to come down and ride around and check out the beautiful new sewers. This is Boulevard Haussmann. There were about 100,000 trees planted also during Haussmannization, trees that we love and enjoy today. And this is the boulevard that's named after him. Another look at Rue de Rivoli from 1870. And so this is the Jardin des Tuileries to the right. That's the Louvre, that's that arm of the Louvre. And then along here are all the new buildings and shops among the 800 that have been torn down and rebuilt. And in fact, the banking system evolved a lot as a result. This is Charles Marvy. He is one of the photographers of Paris that was hired by Haussmann to be used. And he took pictures for him to show.
And this is around the opera, right?
Sorry, my husband is sending me a note to look at the chat.
Yeah, I've got, you can tell your husband I'm on it. We've got some questions piling up here.
Okay, so I'll just look at the pictures, then we'll take questions. But anyway, so here's these beautiful pictures that Charles Marvy took. This is the destruction of the buildings and streets to create the Avenue de l'Opéra. And you can just see in the distance here, can you see my cursor? That's the Opera House, and they're building that boulevard down to the Louvre. Here it is again, that's the Opera House. So you can see 500,000 people during the process of this 20-year renovation. 500,000 people were displaced at some point. And what would happen is the state, Napoleon III's government, would nationalize, so to speak, the land and housing needed for reconstruction. So you would be compensated at the market rate. It didn't always match, but you'd be compensated at the market rate. Then that would be given to, the banks would take the loan, they would loan the government the money, and then they would have tax-free ownership of the land to resell for 30 years. So it was an interesting money-making venture. Here's one of the new public urinals that are giving people a little bit of privacy. And then here are the two images, thankfully, given to us by the Fishers, showing two streets in 1920 and 1926 that were not impacted by Haussmann, but give you a sense of what it must have been like during that time. You see the gutter here. This is where all the sewage, rubbish, and everything would be dumped out and left to rot, and created a lot of problems with sanitation. All right, I'm going to zoom back out. I'm going to let Tom let us know questions or how.
Yeah. So how did Haussmann get his authority and budget? So
Napoleon III was originally elected President Napoleon of the Second Republic. He had a landslide victory in the fall of 1848, and was president for 4 years, but was having a hard time getting anything passed through the legislature. So on the 50th anniversary of his uncle's coronation as Emperor of the First Republic, his nephew Napoleon, president at the time of the Second Republic, decided to stage a coup d'etat in December of 1851. And there was a bloody battle in Paris, but it was put down because he had the support of the army, and he crowned himself Emperor of the Second Republic in 1852. Once he was able to do that, he appointed Haussmann, he wasn't Baron then, as prefect of the Seine. It's basically like making him mayor of New York City. And he didn't have to report to anybody else except Napoleon. So it was Napoleon, Haussmann, and then he was given all the funds he needed and all the authority he had. And that's the only reason the project went through, because it had been butted heads against with other legislatures for years.
We had a couple of questions about eminent domain and displacement. Let me just read them all, and then you can kind of respond. I know you've talked about it. So one class of residents displaced by another for that Rivoli construction. Where did the previous residents go? Was there a process of eminent domain for the government to seize and demolish? And compensation to owners. I think you.
Well, so you're talking about a democracy there. This was not a democracy. This was empire. So he had broad legislative authority, if at all, and he wasn't opposed very much until the second half of his reign, the 1860s, because the economy was really good. Mm-hmm. So if you think about it, he takes power as emperor. He has a vision for Paris. He's compensating the people in the initial areas of his reconstruction. The banks are now being founded for the first time. The banks are functioning in a new way. There's national banks, and they're joint stock exchanges essentially, and they're helping to fund the government process. So you're not having to tax as much as normally you would have done for a project like this with the infrastructure. The people that are displaced are given compensation. Some it's enough, some it's not. And there's actually a lot of caricatures and cartoons at the time of people running off with their open suitcases trying to get out of town fast enough. But let's be honest, whenever there's a building project, some people know in advance. Some people are aware of what to do to take care of themselves economically. This is not a democracy.
Wasn't part of the reason why they expanded the 12th to 20th arrondissements so that they could collect more taxes?
Absolutely. The expansion of 1860 law helped them collect more taxes, helped them actually increase the size of Paris, gave them more access to the parks and green space as well.
So let me read a couple other questions here. One was about when the Paris Metro was built.
That's later. That's during the Third Republic.
Okay. And then maybe we can go to a map, the 1865 map, and go to the Ile de la Cité.
Yes.
Because the question from Nick is, it looks like—
Hi, Nick.
it looks like Ile de la Cité is divided into 2 districts. Why is that? I can't.
It's not. It's considered part. So the one is not referring to the district. Ile de la Cité is considered part of the 4th arrondissement. The Seine is the delineator there. So 1, and then you circle around 2, 3, 4. If I could, let me pull
Our
up.
1878 map, I think, has that. You mean the?
Yep. So.
Oh yeah.
You can see the colors here. So that's the 1st arrondissement. This is the 2nd. This is the 3rd, and the 4th includes Ile de la Cité. Oh, I see what he's saying.
Interesting.
Oh, that's not in the modern. That's not the modern sense. I think that's been changed.
Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Sorry, that's been changed.
So it's no longer split.
Okay. What else?
The other question, what's the history of the Latin Quarter?
The Latin Quarter is so named because it is where all the universities were, and universities, it's in the 5th. So it's down here. This is the Latin Quarter. The Latin Quarter is the 5th arrondissement. It's named so because it's where the universities were, and universities always use the language of Latin to speak and learn and read, and so it was known as the Latin Quarter. It has no reference to being Latin. It's about the language.
Cool. I think we've answered the questions here. If anyone has more questions,
to a certain extent, I'm sure I've missed something or made a mistake or whatever. So please be kind.
You've done great. Why you want to show the other map?
Yeah.
And Gary, you asked a question. Go ahead. If you want to unmute yourself, Gary, you can ask a question or type it in.
Yes. It was my understanding that one of the reasons for the creation of the Grand Boulevards was that in Paris there would be uprisings and communes in places that most of Paris resembled what is now the Marais, these narrow streets, and people would blockade the streets and have an insurrection, and it was much easier to defend a narrow street blockade than it would be with a very wide street, and that the wide streets were, among other things, motivated to put down rebellions. Is there truth in that?
You know, that's an interesting point. It's something that historians actually debate in terms of intentionality. The reality is wide boulevards allow for easier movement of cavalry, soldiers, police, fire, whatever public services are needed. It's interesting because one of the things that Haussmann did is that he redesigned how the streets were made and actually paved over the cobblestones in an attempt to avoid the cobblestones being pulled up and be used as part of the barricades. And you're absolutely right. The narrow streets made it much easier to create barricades during the revolutions, of which there were 9 in the first half of the 19th century. So you're absolutely correct there. The intentionality is debated a little bit by the historians, but I think it seems pretty clear that there must have been some sort of thought to that. However, in 1870, when the communards did stage their protests, it didn't stop them. They pulled up the huge cobblestones on the broad boulevards and made barricades anyway. It didn't come to fruition that it stopped making barricades, but it certainly does make it easier to maneuver troops around the city.
Thank you.
Let's see where this was wonderful is the chat, which I think all of us would agree. Where can I learn more? This is the question.
I will set up a bibliography of books and websites that Tom and I can post on the Paris exhibit. So we'll do a page and you can go there and look and see.
Great.
If people have competing views, there's some books that talk against Haussmann, there's some books that talk for Haussmann, there's some wonderful narratives, there's some very critical and statistical, so we'll have a broad range for people if they're interested in learning more. It's been so fun to do this. I love exploring this way. So now you see, look, okay, so here is 1878. This is a tourist map, and it's got these beautiful 3D etchings of the key monuments. And it's simplified. This is not an accurate map of all the streets, but it really shows you how the Haussmannization design of Paris really simplified access to and from the city, both east, west, north, south, and all the key monuments. If we go in here, and you've got the Jardin de Luxembourg here, and then you can see, I mean, look at this detail on Notre Dame. This is just unbelievable. Look at that. Which so sadly, we're a year out from, just over a year ago, it burned. And we lost that part of that spire and the roof is gone. But it will rise again, I have no doubt. There's Tour Saint-Jacques. We go over to the Louvre. I mean, look at the detail on the Louvre here. So the Palais de Tuileries is gone. That's burned down in 1870. This map is from 8 years later. And then you can go up and you can see the Hall de Blé. It still remains circular. And then you have the Halles. Yeah. And of course, they got the banks now. Very exciting. I'm trying to think what would be interesting.
This is great.
Oh, the opera. We should go to the Opera House. There we go.
And Ron, how are we doing on time?
Maybe time
the Opera
for
House.
another question or two, and then we should get on and ask you to make a few comments about the digital gallery, Tom.
If I have one little last thing to share, if there's no other question.
No, Walter wanted to point out, apparently on Google Maps, Ile de la Cité is still is divided into the first and fourth.
There you go. What do I know? What do I know?
And well, go ahead.
I knew that was going to happen. I knew.
Did you have something else, Courtney?
Oh yeah, so they finally finished Avenue de l'Opéra, right? Those are the pictures we saw, and we have the Opera House here. But what was interesting is that Paris wasn't always a safe place to be, and people would go to the opera. It was you go a couple times a week, like it was your big outing, and you would get in your carriage, you drive up the Avenue de l'Opera, and all the banks were around the center square, and you would go to your bank, hop out, go to your safe deposit box, take out the family jewels, put them on, get back in your carriage, go to the opera, be seen, be done with the opera that night, get in your carriage, go back to the bank, drop them off where they'd be safe, and then you'd head on to the next party or go home. So that was the way they did things back then.
Nice.
Well, Courtney, thank you for leading us off. Your sweeping history of Paris is most appreciated. Your love of Paris shines through. And at least for my part, I cannot wait to make my next return trip to Paris and do the exploring. So thank you. Thumbs up from everybody. Applause.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.